We are Russia's next target. And we are already in harm's way. When I became NATO Secretary General last year, I warned that what is happening in Ukraine could happen to allied countries too. That we had to shift to a wartime mindset. This year we took the big decisions to make NATO stronger.
Secretary General Mark Rutte openly stated that NATO is the next target of Russia. In your opinion, how Moscow can escalate?
Oh, well, we're seeing it all the time. Russia is trying its hybrid warfare, or should one say under the limit warfare. They are all the time trying to cause trouble here and there. So this is a steady attempt at warfare, sending drones over strategic objects, infrastructure, airports, military possible targets, and then organize assassinations and fires somewhere. And increasingly this is being done through criminal networks or accidental people that they manage to hire through Telegram channels. And the question is simply how much does the West tolerate when does the West undertake measures that are much harder. The less reaction there is in the West, the more encouraged Russia is to go ahead. Now we are seeing that Russia is undertaking massive drone espionage or surveillance, and this is a question of hundreds of drones in at least 20 different countries. We're also seeing that they're organizing bombings and fires in certain places as Poland and Lithuania, and attempts to bomb fast mail. So Russia is doing all kinds of things, and then of course the ordinary things as overflights with military airplanes that have to be scrambled. The question is, where is the limit? And the Russians are very innovative when it comes to violating the borders. For example, sending in the so-called refugees from various Middle Eastern countries just to cause trouble in Poland and Lithuania and Finland.
The Washington Post reports that peace document package consists of 3 agreements: peace plan, security guarantees, and economic recovery. We are going to talk about all of them in order. And one of the proposals is a kind of Korean scenario, demilitarization zone without heavy weapons inside it. As I understand, it has to be done according to current front line, but Russia annexed and integrated all territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions in its constitution. It means that Russia considers all these territories as Russian territories. At the same time, according to Ukrainian constitution and obviously international law, these territories are Ukrainian. How can work this demilitarization zone in such conditions?
Of course, it can't happen. And the fundamental problem here, let me take a step back, is that the US should not be involved in this at all. Trump has shown time and time again that his favorite is Putin. He called Putin a genius when he attacked Ukraine in 2022. And he has hardly criticized Putin for anything. He has not put any conditions on Putin, while he has criticized President Zelensky time and time again, and he literally ambushed him in the White House on the 28th of February. So, Trump invited Putin for no reason to Alaska and achieved nothing. So Putin is supported by Trump, And the question is not what side Trump is on, but how far his budding alliance with Putin really goes. So I don't think that Europe or Ukraine should talk to Trump and his people. Witkoff and Kushner. Kushner has no official position, so he only represents the family. Trump should simply be kicked out, and these agreements proposed agreements should not be a basis of anything. What is unfortunate is that the European Union has not put forward any more elaborate proposal. They should work together with Ukraine and discuss what needs to be done. And one needs to have a clear idea how will this war end. There is a completely flawed statement that goes around that all wars end with negotiations, which is completely untrue. The First World War did not end with negotiations, but first with the Russian Revolution and second with the German Revolution. Countries collapse, regimes collapse. That's a normal way of ending a war. World War II ended with the capitulation of Germany and the capitulation of Japan. Well, before that, the capitulation of Italy. So the normal end for this war would be that Putin loses power in Russia. However, that will happen, and that will be an internal issue. And until then, what the West should do is to support Ukraine far more than is currently done, while Donald Trump is not giving anything whatsoever to Ukraine, no money and no arms. And on top of it, he wants to profit from the war by seizing the $300 billion of Russian frozen assets together with Russia. So Trump is on the wrong side. We should simply ignore everything he says and not take him seriously.
According to proposals, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is taken over under Kyiv control or under US control. Again, if Russia considers all Zaporizhzhia region as its sovereign territory and so plant as well, why Russia would be ready to transfer the plant under US control?
We don't know that. We know that this has been proposed by Kirill Dmitriev, written together with Witkoff and Kushner, who are interested in making money on Russia and Ukraine. Putin has never said that he will accept it. Putin has not minimized his demands in any regards. So this we should simply disregard.
I got you. Next proposal is related to security guarantees similar to the 5th article of NATO. Do you believe it can work? Because even now we are not sure that the 5th article would work and USA are ready to protect Europe, even right now.
Indeed. We don't know if NATO exists any longer. And that means that Article 5 is not credible. The only way of giving Ukraine security guarantees is to make sure that the Ukrainian army is strong enough and that it gets enough of financing and arms from Europe. The US is out of it. The US is completely unreliable, both when it comes to arms deliveries, even if they are paid for by Europe or Ukraine. And then on top of it, the US often imposes limitations on how Ukraine can use the arms. So the less the US is involved, the better. Better to produce arms in Ukraine or in Europe with as little of US licenses as possible.
One more proposal is joining Ukraine to EU in 2027. it can become encouragement for Ukraine, obviously, and for its citizens. But is Europe ready for this step? And what main obstacles you see?
Well, 2027 would be completely unrealistic. 2030 would be an optimistic scenario. The main blockage now is Hungary and its Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's all in favor of Putin. I would prefer that the EU excluded Hungary from voting through Article 7. But that cannot be done because Slovakia, one country, would veto it, and soon probably the Czech Republic and the Prime Minister Andrej Babiš will do the same thing. So the big hope is that in April next year, Viktor Orban will finally lose the elections. But Hungary is not a very democratic country as it is today. So the question is if the landslide will be sufficiently big against his Fidesz party. So Hungary, as it is an absolute obstacle, and the EU can do many things without formally open negotiations. It's clear what needs to be done, and Ukraine has already done a lot because of its association agreement that has been in place for almost a decade. And I was just in Brussels for 2 days, and the European Commission is very positive to what Ukraine has done in order to prepare for the accession. And the European Commission has now 100 professionals who are working in the Ukraine service to facilitate Ukraine's accessions. So technically, this can be done quite fast because the Ukrainian officials are skillful and well motivated, and the Ukrainian parliament adopts good laws in fast and well. But the blockage is entirely political for the time being. Hungary, we don't know what will happen next.
Mm-hmm. I would like to come back to frozen Russian assets because next proposal is economic development of Ukraine, and one of financial sources can become 200 billion frozen Russian assets. But Europeans can't negotiate about it inside Europe. Under what circumstances USA is ready to put enough pressure on EU to provide Ukraine with these reparation investments?
It's the other way around. The US has $5 billion of frozen Russian assets. And since September, the US has strongly urged the European Union not to seize the Russian assets because the US wants this money for itself and for doing business with Russia and motivate Russia to end the war, which is completely unrealistic. So the US under President Trump is both on the wrong side, poorly informed, and not very intelligent. So this is a real robber government that the US currently has. And the Trump family has made more than $3 billion in personal wealth since Trump became president again. So this makes the corruption in Ukraine look like children's play. This is the most corrupt regime that any Western country has seen, at least since World War II, but probably for a very long time. And they are trying to block the usage of the frozen assets in Europe, and Europe can decide that on their own. This is supposed to be decided by the European Council at its next meeting, that is the the meeting of the leaders of the European countries, which will take place on the 18th and 19th of December. And the chairman, Antonio Costa, has said that he will not let anybody out of the meeting until they have made a positive decision. The question is exactly how that will be done. It could be using the Russian assets. It could be done with a big loan from the European Union. The total amount being discussed is 210 billion euro. 18 billion euro is actually located in private banks in France, and 192 billion euro in the private Euroclear bank in Belgium. Belgium is opposing this because Belgium deals with war profiteering. It gets 1.5 billion euro a year in taxes from the Russian assets, and it wants to continue getting this free money, which is completely permissible. What is permissible is that Belgium demands guarantees if Russia, contrary to expectation, would win in an international arbitration court. It's extremely unlikely that that would be possible. Essentially, they can only go to the International Court of Justice that has already condemned Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. So Russia is not likely to enjoy any kind of law in any international arbitration court, and Russian companies are regularly losing in international arbitration courts. So this is vital that the EU next week really manages to decide financing for Ukraine. But make no mistake, Trump is dead against it, and the US is agitating against this solution because Trump hates the European Union and wants it dissolved. And therefore he supports anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian extremist parties in Europe, like Alternative for Germany and Reform in Britain.
Anders, when it comes to general situation, according to all events we have been observing, at what stage do you think the peace process currently stands?
I mean, there's no peace process. So what we are seeing is that the war is intensifying. What the Americans argue quite strongly is that Russia has an escalation advantage, showing that Russia is bombing civilian parts more and more and has minor progress on the front in Donbass, notably more or less taking the critical town of Pakrovsk, while the Ukrainian General Syrskyi says that Ukraine has recovered parts of Pakrovsk. So the Russian advances are very limited. The Americans tend to overestimate them. What is very important is that Ukraine has bombed a lot of oil facilities in Russia, and in particular that they are causing Russian oil exports to decline. And this is the way of tightening the economic belts for the Russians. So I'm very impressed with the Ukrainian bombings in Russia, with drones and now also with ballistic missiles of military facilities, oil facilities, and the infrastructure.
Yeah. We see that Trump openly humiliates Europe in terms of its role in negotiation process. Let's face it, current American administration reckons that everything has to be solved between Washington and Moscow. But Kiev and Brussels throw a monkey wrench in the works. How you see and how you assess EU potential in negotiations and EU role in these negotiations?
Well, the EU should simply take over and forget about the US. The worry has been that Europe is dependent on the US nuclear umbrella. And I think that Europe should simply make itself militarily independent. And if you look upon military expenditures, Europe spends far more than Russia, 2-3 times more than Russia, or rather 3 times more than Russia on its military, perhaps not very efficiently, but we have more sophisticated arms than Russia, and together with Ukraine, that has done a lot in terms of arms innovation. This could be very strong, and that could happen much faster than anticipated, because military develops very fast in a situation of war. And what we have now is, of course, a war. While the Americans are out of it, the US arms producers are not doing very well on the stock market because they are not very innovative. They are old, bureaucratic, and far too expensive. So now we are seeing one country after the other is not looking to F-35s from America any longer, but instead Saab, Gripen, or Dassault's Rafale, or the Eurofighter. So these, the US arms industry is clearly losing on the war in Ukraine. And we're also seeing that the US arms are not very useful any longer to considerable extent. Abrams tanks have done no good in Ukraine, and we are seeing that the surface ships have become very, very vulnerable, as the Ukrainian sea drones have proven in the Black Sea. And the US is wasting a lot of money on these not very efficient arms types.
Mm. If I understood you correctly, European capabilities to support Ukraine without USA, everything is okay about it, and Ukraine will be able to preserve its statehood without US aid, or
yes.
no?
Yes. The issue that is difficult to know for an outsider is intelligence, but given all the new technologies, I'm convinced that intelligence should not be a serious hindrance. What has been discussed otherwise is air defense. Europe has a lot of air defense and can do as much, and we are now seeing that the US Patriot missiles, which are very expensive, have not been very effective since September and in Ukraine. And the US has a lot of long-distance rockets. Tomahawk has been discussed, but of course Trump is not allowing Ukraine to buy Tomahawk missiles. And there is a Taurus missiles produced in Germany, and the Storm Shadow produced in Britain, and Scalp in France. There are alternatives. And now Ukraine is producing Flamingo and other missiles itself. So the US is making itself superfluous.
Why Germany isn't ready to provide us with Tauruses?
I think that is coming, but that should have happened for a long time. Previously, it was the former Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The Social Democratic Party is still a part of the German coalition, but clearly Chancellor Friedrich Merz wants to provide Ukraine with Taurus. it's not easy. You have to have a full system in place. And of course, everybody who puts arms into Ukraine wants to be able to show that they are effective. Nobody wants to be proven as useless as the Russian Black Sea Navy.
Actually, your words about European strength are very promising, because here in Ukraine, unfortunately, the vast majority of our citizens don't believe that Europe is capable of protecting us without United States. But we will see. And at the same time, I would like to ask you, in your opinion, what is the biggest vulnerability of European Union right now?
Well, you can say that there are two vulnerabilities. One is lack of unity, and the other is comparatively low economic growth, and in particular, when it comes to high-tech development, the big theme in the global economy now is artificial intelligence, and that's a struggle between China and the US. Europe doesn't play much of a role there, for a couple of relevant companies, but not much. So unity and growth, these are the two issues.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that Trump may withdraw from the negotiations at all?
Trump loves being unpredictable. So I think that he can withdraw and come back and make a nuisance of himself, as he loves doing. Yeah. He has no role to play there, so I would greatly welcome if he withdraws. I can't understand all these Europeans and also Ukrainians who think that Trump would be an advantage in some regard.
Anders, thank you very much for this interview, and have a good day.
Thank you. All the best.